Sullivan, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, good to see you. Thank you, by the way, in terms of states you're visiting, for coming up to Alaska. I know you had a good visit last summer. We welcome you back. I'm going to just talk very briefly. Mr. Chairman, I do want to, we had a bit of a contentious exchange last week. I do want to keep working with your team, your staff, and the minority staff on this committee to work with my office on that issue we raised. Haven't gotten any data or anything from your team, but I'd like that. I think I'm out of courtesy. I think I deserve that. And my constituency, there's a lot of people who were watching what your staff was doing in my state when I was home over the weekend, and nobody was happy about it. So I'd like to. I'm not going to continue that debate, but I do want your staff to come brief me personally on what they're up to. So. But, Mr. Administrator, I also want to just touch on, one of the issues, you're not doing it so much, but in this committee, I need to do it. So many decisions that the Biden administration takes, particularly as it relates to Alaska and the so-called environment, are lawless. The president, 2 weeks ago, announced that he was going to shut down the Ambler Road, which had already been approved in an EIS, to the Ambler Mining District, one of the biggest critical mineral districts in the country. A federal law in 1980 actually mandates that road be permitted. I can read you the language. I'm just going to submit it. This is a NILCA section 201B. I'd like to submit it for the record. Mandates it. The Biden administration violated that law. The Biden administration on ANWR, which we got done, I submitted a letter to Secretary Holland on May 2nd, 2024. I'd like to submit that to the record. On ANWR, which we got into law, to have 2 lease sales required, mandated by the Congress in a law. Secretary Holland just said she was going to ignore those leases, cancel them. Interestingly, there was a FOIA request, and even the Biden OMB went back to Secretary Holland saying, geez, where do you have the legal authority to do this, Madam Secretary? That's in this letter. The Biden administration is asking her, you can't do that. She's doing it. That's violating the law. And this, I'd like to submit for the record, 63 executive orders and executive actions targeting my state of Alaska, 63 from this administration, singularly focused on Alaska. Most of them are lawless. By the way, most of them hurt the indigenous population of my state. 20% of Alaska is indigenous, and so it's a little rich when I keep hearing about the focus of this administration on environmental justice, helping indigenous communities when they come after my state so much and hurt the Native people. I'm going to get to that with you, Mr. Administrator. But I do want to ask, West Virginia versus EPA. Did you read that Supreme Court case?
Yes.
And I can't remember, are you a lawyer?
No.
Okay.
Thankfully.
Yeah. Well, I was going to comment. There's not a lot of good lawyers in the Biden administration since they violate the law all the damn time. But I'll give you a pass on that. But with regard to agency rules, it said the agency must point to a clear congressional authorization for the power it claims. This new NEPA rule, I know it didn't come from you, Administrator, but do you think that was something that the Congress granted the administration authority to rewrite NEPA?
I can't say that I've dove into the NEPA rule. It's not in our agency, but I trust my colleagues have followed the law.
Okay.
And I do know that we have a part of the NEPA process, and we feel comfortable with our part.
I think the lawyers and even the good lawyers and even the non-lawyers, even the bad lawyers, need to reread West Virginia versus EPA. It's a really important case. But let me get to something more positive with you. I really appreciated you meeting with our Alaska Native communities, particularly on the contaminated lands issues. You know the whole history there. You and I have talked about it. We're working on it. Senator Kelly and I have legislation that we're trying to get through this committee and the WRDA bill relating to Indian tribes in Arizona, lower 48, in Alaska. We want to authorize the EPA and the Army Corps to enter into an agreement with Indian tribes and Alaska Native tribes for the purposes of compensatory mitigation for a permitted activity under the 404 program. You and I have talked about it before. I know it came up in that roundtable you had in Anchorage. Would you support that idea, Mr. Administrator, and can you work with me and Senator Kelly on that idea?
We'd be happy to provide technical assistance and work with Congress on those ideas, yes.
How about, would the EPA support, again, it's kind of same category, a categorical exclusion for Alaska contaminated lands programs? That comes under NEPA review. And maybe if that's too quick a question, I can submit that for the record, more detail to get your answer on
I was
that.
going to say, let us dig into that. I'd love for our staffs to talk through that one.
And then I know in the President's budget, there was a significant amount of money on contaminated lands cleanup. But I'll ask you, because I want to be respectful here, for the record, what other resources or authorities does the EPA need to help clean up these native lands, which, remember, the native people of Alaska got the lands from the feds, 44 million acres, and the biggest land settlement for native people probably in the history of the world. And a lot of it was contaminated. We worked together, the chairman and I, to say, well, a couple of years ago, hey, at least CERCLA doesn't apply. These Alaska Native groups can't be liable since the federal government gave them polluted land. But are there other resources or authorities you need to help cleaning up these native lands that are contaminated in Alaska? It's a top priority of mine. And I know you learned a lot about this when you were in Alaska. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with the different native groups that were impacted and, you know, do the due diligence on this really unjust situation.
Yes.
Administrator, I'm going to ask you to be brief in your response, and then we're going to recognize Senator Fetterman.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for hosting that meeting. I think you and I and Senator Murkowski announced $150 million going towards some of this cleanup. There's more that we can tap in both Bill and IRA. We should talk about how we do.
Okay, I'll submit those for the record, more detailed answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Senator Fetterman, welcome. Good to see you. Thanks.